So welcome everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce to our speaker, my brother Gary Thomas. I just asked him, I said, are you just by way of title the chief mandated exorcist? And he says, no, there's only one chief. So he is the mandated exorcist for the Diocese of San Jose, a pastor at Sacred Heart in Saratoga. He came, he was wonderful in his talk to us, this first part of his talk, talking a little bit about the spiritual life, the spiritual battle. And in particularly, we wanted to have him, and eager thanks to Yvonne for connecting us in the parish, is particularly looking at spiritual life and spiritual warfare, and that idea of what we can do in practical ways to be armed and to defend ourselves and to enter into this battle. Make no mistake, as St. Paul says, principalities and powers, that's what we're dealing with, especially in this recent light of scandals and darkness, not to absolve personal responsibility, but there is darkness at work, there is evil at work, and we need to recognize that and be alert to that. And so I couldn't be any more grateful, and a warm welcome to Father Gary talking to us tonight about this needful subject. Father Gary.
Thank you, Father Michael. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
Why don't we begin with prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord our God, we ask your blessing, please, upon this gathering this night, upon this assembly, upon the ideas and truths and experiences and perspective that I share this night as the priest who is the mandated exorcist for our diocese in San Jose. And may tonight's event, may it help bring clarity to all those who have questions. May it bring a sense of peace to all those who may be unnerved. And may it also bring reassurance in the power of Christ crucified. And we ask this in prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Well, I'm very grateful to Father Michael and to the Friends of Christ for inviting me here this evening. I think it was about this time last year that I made an appearance, and I think it was downstairs in one of the rooms. I'm very grateful to be able to have access to the church. You guys think I'm a really terrific, beautiful church here in this part of San Francisco. I'm a native myself. My mom and dad were born and raised in the city. My mom in the Mission, my dad in Potrero. My dad was in St. Teresa's Parish. My mother was in St. James Parish in the Mission. I grew up in South San Francisco. I've been a priest for almost 35 years. I was ordained for the Diocese of San Jose. However, when I entered in 1979, I was actually studying for the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And I had moved to San Jose to work. I was a mortician, a funeral director for a number of years before I was a priest, both in the town I grew up in South San Francisco and then down the peninsula, and then eventually in the San Jose area. And so when the diocese split, I was a student at St. Pat's Seminary. We had 90 days to decide if we wanted to affiliate with San Jose or remain affiliated with the Archdiocese. And in day 87, after almost 3 months of discernment, I felt that's when my vocation really was reawakened, was when I was down in Silicon, well, it wasn't called Silicon Valley, then Seneca Valley, so I opted to go to San Jose. So, but I still have lots of very warm ties with the Archdiocese and also with the city of San Francisco. Tonight I'm going to talk about the 4 ordinary means of protection against evil, which kind of means we're going to kind of truncate the topic. Last time I spoke really about the sort of the ministry of exorcism and deliverance in the Catholic Church. We talked about signs and discernment and routine and process and a variety of other topics that very much were more of a broad perspective. Tonight we're going to be much more specific. Lots of times people will call or they'll email me, and I've had just several just in the last couple of days, where people become very worried about their state, what kind of state of grace that they're in, the relationship they have with Jesus. Sometimes people have had experiences that they will attribute to the demonic, which oftentimes are not. So just in the last week or so, I've had probably 20 emails from a person, I don't know where he lives, in which he's asked me lots of questions with regards to how do I make sure I'm protected, and then got very specific about things that have happened to him. And in every one of my responses, I've said back to him, as long as you stay in the state of grace, every question that you have, you know, if I associate with this person, or if I read this kind of a book, or if I do this kind of a thing, is that going to create the possibility of something demonic? So finally last night I said to him, this is the last email I'm going to respond to. And it isn't because I'm, wanted to be rude with him, but because I feel like I was sort of buying into sort of almost like an obsessive compulsive disorder, where somebody can become so overly scrupulous that I don't want to enable someone like that to continue dialoguing with me when I'm trying to say to this person, be assured of God's power being far more powerful than that of Satan or any of his minions. But he's just one example of a number where people become very worried, and they oftentimes kind of like get derailed by things that people may say to them or things that people may read. Oftentimes people will email me based on YouTube that they've seen. I don't put the YouTubes on the internet, other people do. But because of my being the subject of a book that was published in 2009 entitled The Right, which later became a movie 2 years later by the same title, starring Anthony Hopkins, this has kind of put me on the radar. And so very often I would get people emailing me who saw this YouTube, and they'll take something out of context and then somehow use it as a proof text to somehow try and convince themselves that something that I may have said therefore gives them credence that oftentimes is incorrect. That it's much more important for us to focus on God, the Trinity, the sacraments, our sacramentals, our prayer life, all our moral life, our faith life, and our relationship with God, than it is to focus on the diabolical. So what I'm hoping to do tonight, over the course of probably 40 or 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about these four ordinary means, and by doing so, what I hope you walk out with tonight is a sense of reassurance. The crucifix, which is central in this church and in most Catholic churches, the crucifix is the battle symbol for us Christians, specifically Catholic Christians, since we use the crucifix, to embolden us to be humble with our God, and yet to be thankful in the same breath for what God has done for us in Christ. Which is why Jesus says, do this in memory of me. Which is why we celebrate the Eucharist every weekend, obviously, every day, but every weekend, every Sunday, to keep the Lord's Day holy, just as Jesus told his apostles, do this in memory of me. It's a command performance. And so, the rhythm of our life as Catholic Christians goes a very long way for us to be also carrying the metaphorical battle armor necessary to live in the world in which we do, and recognizing that we are part of the world, not apart from the world. The Church, before the Second Vatican Council, considered itself sort of an embattled citadel for 400 years from the time of Trent to the time of the beginning of the Second Vatican Council. We don't function that way anymore. We don't see ourselves that way. We live in the world. And because we live in the world, we are not protected in such a fashion that we don't come up against and brush up against forces of evil and forces of darkness. But nonetheless, it's important for us to focus on the cross that led to the resurrection, and that leads to our resurrection as well. So I want to talk about a little bit about faith life. I want to share with you the one personal little minute experience of the 4 years in the classroom that I studied when I was a student at St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park. And it was the first week of school, and I had not been in the seminary before. I had gone to the University of San Francisco here in San Francisco, majored in business, and got a degree in management. So the first course that we took in my first semester, one of 6 or 7 in the first semester, was a course in systematic theology. The rector at that time was a tremendous teacher, and the only item I can actually quote for my 4 years at St. Patrick's in the classroom setting is the definition of faith that Father Howard Blackner gave us, that I want to share with you tonight, which I've shared a couple of times in homilies. The definition of faith is an assent of the intellect to truths of revelation by a command of the will through grace. Very succinct. I think it's very cogent, and it's easy to remember. Because faith is not a feeling. Lots of times people's faith level is kind of just at the emotional level. And there is an emotional component to faith. But faith is not a feeling, faith is a decision. And faith does involve the intellect. It is not simply an experience of the heart, it's an experience of our reason. And that is a gift that God has given us that makes us intrinsically human, to truths of revelation. And so God gave us a brain, God gave us reason, God gave us the gift to be able to read and to write. And to those revelations we find in Scripture and tradition. And so in our Catholicity, we have an array of gifts that are made available to us for us to have the support of our faith and to be able to articulate our faith in a fashion that makes sense to us and the people to whom we're speaking. By a command of the will. So God does not interfere in free will. Now, very, very often when people come, this is a quick little aside, when people come sometimes with their call, they have a loved one who they think has a diabolical issue, potentially, or has some other issue that they think has a spiritual component to it. My first question is, if they're coming as an advocate, I will say to them, does the person wish to come and have this conversation, and is this person open to the possibility of healing or liberation? And if the answer is no, there really isn't much I honestly can do for them in the role as exorcist. I can pray with them if they so wish to, but God does not interfere in our free will, because our free will is part of our human state. And so in that same way, God allowed Lucifer, he gave the angelic realm, which is a realm of a higher nature than ourselves, he gave them free will too. But their free will is far more clear than ours is, because they are of a higher nature than we are. So our free will is such that God respects us sufficiently that in order for us to truly love him, know him, and serve him, we have to be able to do it in a free fashion. And faith functions in the same way. So it does involve our reason, it does involve our intellectual capacity, based on what we read, what we think, how we discern, how we communicate with others. That involves our free will with the power of divine assistance, which is what grace is. Grace is a relationship. When I was a kid growing up, in All Souls in South San Francisco. We were kind of led to, wasn't taught in a way that was what I would consider, in error, but my impression was that grace was a thing, and that when you celebrated the sacraments, you accumulated grace, which is true. But the way it was articulated for us as kids led me to believe it was more like something that you squirreled away. Now, as an adult, I realize that grace is a relationship, and that when we celebrate the sacraments, or we engage in prayer, or when we act as Christians in the world, we are also engaging in the grace of God, and specifically the sacraments do provide that kind of spiritual muscle for us. So I wanted to start the presentation up tonight by just giving you a definition. It's not the definition, but it's a definition. It's the one that has carried me for 35 years as a priest. Faith involves believing in the existence of God. That at some point in our life, I believe, we choose to believe that there is a God, a personal supreme being. I talk to people all the time who have a variety of ways in which they believe that they're relating to God. Some of it is conceptual, some of it is a bit agnostic. There are people who believe in the existence of something beyond us or a higher power. But in our Catholic Christian optic, we believe in a personal supreme being. And the predisposition of our lives is directed toward that belief in God. Because philosophically, if we're going to have a faith life and we're going to understand God in a relational way, then we have to understand God as a set of persons. Because we don't relate to a concept, we don't relate to a force, and we don't relate to some kind of idea. We relate to a person. And so, in our own philosophical way, our faith life is ground zero. And that faith life requires a decision on our part that, first of all, we believe that there is a reality, a spiritual reality beyond the physicality of our existence. And does that reality lead us to believe that there is a state called heaven, or a place, however you want to describe it, and that somehow we are on a course. Now, I grew up in a home that was very Catholic. There are many people I've met in my life, sometimes who come in for appointments, or sometimes who come in and are married to a Catholic and they themselves are not a Catholic, or sometimes I've met with Catholics who've left the church for a while and returned, or sometimes I've met people who just left the church and either want to find their way back or not necessarily interested in finding their way back, but there's something that's incomplete in their life. And so my role, oftentimes, is to help kind of deeper into what was their experience in the first place, and then try and help them move from A to square B. But there has to be a sense of a sort of a philosophical / theological precept that I'm not here by accident, and that I come to a conclusion at some point in my life. I may have been taught, or I may have been schooled in all of the truths I eventually chose to believe. But eventually, I have to choose to believe them, and not just simply consume them or embrace them because someone else alone told me about them, but that also I come to a choice on my own. And so, once a long time ago, oh gosh, I think it was my first assignment at St. Joseph in Cupertino, which now, just down the street in that parish, this wasn't true then, but it's true now, Apple's headquarters is located. And I can remember being in the left-hand lane at the corner of Stevens Creek and Highway 9, and there was a car ahead of me, and it had a bumper sticker on it. And the bumper sticker read, "Life is hard, then you die." And of course, when you're sitting at the red light waiting for it to go, you have time to think about this. Now, I still remember this all these years later. Life is hard, then you die. Well, it depends on the optic out of which you're looking. Nobody gets on planet Earth free of suffering. Nobody. Suffering is part of the deal. God doesn't impose it on us, but it is part of the condition of our broken human state. Then Christ came and put back together when he lived, suffered, died, and rose again, the Paschal mystery. But there are people for whom they only can see a certain optic. And that optic oftentimes has suffering in it, but where's the joy? Where's the uplift? For some people, there isn't necessarily a lot of joy in their life. I've met lots of people who've suffered a great deal. Father Michael earlier tonight alluded to the issues related to sexual abuse and the report that came out from the State Attorney General of Pennsylvania just a couple of days ago about the 8 dioceses. Most all of that report is not new news. I spoke with the exorcist in Scranton, Pennsylvania 2 nights ago. He's a very close friend of mine. Now, that's not in any which way to dismiss the gravity of those crimes that they are. But all of those tragic cases, except 2, are not new. That doesn't mean that those dioceses did not exercise misconduct. But it is to say in the same breath that many of those people who were abused as children are still, if not all of them, still packing around the wounds of those traumas that in many cases they have not healed from. I read online last night a number of cases by one of the dioceses and some of the testimonies that people gave to the State Attorney General, and they broke my heart. But that's not sufficient enough. We as a church have to deal with this. So oftentimes, we don't see people suffering. A lot of the suffering that people undergo is internalized. It can be depression, or a psychosis, or some other mental condition, or psychiatric condition. Yes, many times it is physical. Someone dies. We all die. Someone comes down and contracts cancer of some kind or another. Or Bishop of Monterey just recently died a month ago from Alzheimer's, which came on to him very quickly. He was dead in a period of 8 months. So that's an outward physical suffering. But we all know that we walk around every day. When I'm at Mass on a Sunday or a weekday, we begin the penitential rite. I can look around the church, take her out in Saratoga, and in my mind, I can look and see which people I've had personal relationship with in a meeting or something, or an experience, a death, or somebody who's dying, or suffering, or a broken marriage, or children problems with kids, or whatever. And people come, we all come, with our satchel full of stuff to Mass. And then bring it before Christ, and ask Christ to carry it for us. Because we can't do it all by ourselves. And so, ground zero is a faith life. And in order for us really to have the kind of protections that God does provide us, we have to have a basis for those protections. And that therefore we come to a point in our life and we decide that there is a God who made me, saved me, and sanctified me, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that my life, therefore, is going to be lived through that kind of lens. And again, part of it involves grace, I do believe. There are some people who really, I've met in my life, who really, truly want to believe, but they just can't take that leap. There are other people for whom, for whatever reason, They have a very deep faith life. But that faith life is critical for us to be able to navigate in the world in which we live, not just in today's time, but in every era, every age. The second category, the second means, is a prayer life. Prayer is basically the activity that fundamentally feeds the spiritual aspect of our life. In short, prayer is how we communicate with God. Every one of us is a spiritual being. I say this now at funerals all the time. Because at funerals you get a mixed bag of folks. You get practicing Catholics, non-practicing Catholics, non-Catholics, non-Christians, atheists, agnostics. You get the whole gamut. That's not to say we didn't get that 100 years ago. But today, at least in the 35 years I've been a priest, I find it more pronounced now. You get really the gamut of, here comes everybody. And so, what makes us all spiritual beings is we have a soul. I find that very evangelical when I say that at a funeral, because there are people there who don't necessarily think of themselves as being a spiritual being, who may not necessarily, through no fault of their own or even any kind of rejection of God, they don't realize or they don't think that what makes me a human being is that I have a soul. And so, because of that, in order for me to feed the spiritual part of my life, and if I have a faith life, I've made the decision that there is a God, a personal God, a supreme being. You all have relationships, just like I do. In order for us to have them, we have to nurture them. We have to spend time with them. I'm not a person who's got a green thumb per se, but I've got 5 or 6 plants in the dining room of the house, and a couple in the kitchen. I don't know why I paid attention to all but one. Somehow I think the cleaning service that comes in every week, I always thought that they would water the plant in the kitchen in the corner that I just kind of forgot about. And then one day, I noticed that plant appeared again. So, out of guilt, I thought, well, I don't know if it's dead or not, but it looks dead. I will at least try to restore it. So I started watering it. And gradually, it hadn't breathed its last. And now it's beginning to gain its leaves and it's looking a lot healthier. That's because I paid attention to it. Our relationship with God is no different. Our relationship with God requires us to give God our attention. His attention is on us perpetually and permanently. But it does require, a relationship does require a two-way deal. And so, in all of us, I believe, there is what's called the God gene. I think every person has this. From the moment that we were able to figure out that we had reason, we began asking, at some point in our life, 3 basic questions. Why am I here? What am I doing here? And what happens to me when I die? Because the God gene connects me to a source of authorship. Everything in the created universe has a beginning. Everything, except God himself. So if everything in the created universe has a beginning, then we have a beginning too. And so it's sort of like, what is all of this about?